The raid on the homeworld had stung the machine into a single furious purpose, and across the dark, its main fleet was already gathering for a reckoning at a waypoint called Kestrel. But a war does not wait on one battle, however large. Before that blow could fall, the machine reached out in the far south toward a place the old charts called the Coral Reach, and there the first carrier battle of a new age began. Two forces the size of nations would stalk each other for days across light hours of empty black and never once see the ships they had come to kill. The long retreat was over. Now the turn had to be held. Everything about how the war was fought had changed, and almost no one had noticed yet. The swarms of the first months had been short-ranged things. A fleet had to close to knife range to loose them, and wall ships and killers burned together in one enveloping melee, near enough to watch each other die. Those close brawls were over. The tenders had grown too large and too precious to risk in a straight collision, so the killing moved outward into clouds of drones, each side now flung for hundreds of light seconds. A battle would be decided before the capital ships ever came in sight of one another, if they came in sight at all. The prize this time lay in the far south of human space, where the Verge Commonwealth still held. They were Rel's people, the worlds he had died trying to warn, the last free reach of the Old South. If the Verge fell, the whole southern flank of the war fell with it, and the machine would have a clear road into a soft interior with no fleet left to defend it. The machine's plan was cold and simple, the way its plans always were. A Vharen tender force was driving south to take Verrin Station, the lone waypoint that tied the Verge to the rest of the Union. Hold Verrin, and the Commonwealth stayed connected. Lose it, and the Verge was cut off from every friend it had, left to be digested at the machine's leisure, so the Union sent the only thing it could get there in time: a single carrier force, and too few of them. This was the tender age of the war, and no one had fought one before. The great drone tenders were the reach of a fleet now, chunky armored capital ships that never fired their own guns if they could help it, that instead opened their bays and breathed out clouds of drones to do the seeing and the dying miles ahead. A tender was a fortress and a blind spot at once. Everything depended on the eyes it sent out, and on getting them home. So the first move of the battle, on both sides, was to throw scout drones into the dark by the hundred. They fanned out ahead of the fleets in vast thin screens, each one a single cold eye creeping through the black, hunting for the drive glow or the heat shadow that would betray the enemy first. Whoever found the other first would strike first. In a battle this blind, the first clean sighting was worth more than a squadron. Command of the Union force fell to Admiral Sereth, a spare, unhurried man who had spent the bad months studying exactly how the machine thought. He knew he was outmassed and outgunned. He also knew something the numbers did not show, which was that the enemy driving toward him had never once in the whole war been made to change its mind in the middle of a fight. Sereth meant to fight the way a lieutenant named Vance had taught the fleet to fight at the Tallow Deep, only now at the scale of a whole battle force. One will, running through every ship and every drone, fast and flexible, able to feel a battle shift and answer it inside a heartbeat. The machine fought as one perfect, coordinated whole. Sereth wanted his fleet to fight as one living whole, which was a different and far more dangerous thing. The man who had first seen why that mattered rode with the fleet as an advisor now. Halvard, once a lord of the Gilded Diadem, had crossed over after the South broke, and he had spent every day since preaching the same hard sermon to anyone who would listen. A machine that coordinates by perfect obedience, he told them, also obeys perfectly, and a thing that always obeys can be read. No one in the room fully believed him yet. They were about to. Lieutenant Ione Vance was given the forward screen, the largest command she had yet held. She had run a squadron in the dark at the Tallow Deep and led an element over the homeworld itself. But this was a wider stage. The eyes of an entire battle fleet were hers now, a broad spread of scouts and light cruisers thrown out ahead as its screen. It was the most dangerous seat in the order of battle and the most vital. And Sereth had handed it to a junior officer for one plain reason. She could build a picture out of almost nothing, better than anyone in the fleet. Gull went out at the head of her scout drones, the same scarred little machine that had crept a wrecked corridor at the deep, older now and half rebuilt and worth a squadron of newer eyes. Ione had stopped thinking of it as a tool a long time ago. She sent it out first into the dark ahead of everything, trusting it to come back and tell her the truth. The cruelty of a blind battle was the waiting and the lag. Light itself crawled across these distances, so every sighting a scout sent home was already old when it arrived, a picture of where the enemy had been an hour ago and might no longer be. A commander did not fight the enemy in front of him. He fought a ghost of the enemy an hour in the past and guessed the rest. So both fleets groped. They read smudges of drive heat that might be a battle group or a cold rock warmed by a distant sun. They chased echoes that faded before they could resolve. Every false contact was a trap, because a fleet that emptied its bays at a ghost would be caught blind and hollow when the real enemy walked in. Patience cost nothing and everything, and both sides paid it hour by hour. The Vharen tender force came on exactly as its plan required, and that was its strength and its flaw both. 3 great tenders and their escorts drove south in a formation of geometric perfection, every ship spaced to the meter, every drone screen deployed on schedule, the whole vast shape moving with the flawless certainty of a thing that has never once doubted. It had crushed a dozen fleets moving just like this. It saw no reason to move any other way, and that was the opening Halvard had promised. A fleet that coordinates by perfect obedience does the same perfect thing every time. It deploys its screens at the same ranges, turns at the same marks, answers each move with the one answer its doctrine holds correct. Watch it long enough, and you do not have to see it to know it. You can feel where it must be, because it can be nowhere else. Sereth's fleet had no such certainty, and he was glad of it. His ships came south loose and ragged by Vharen standards, spread wide, feeling their way, ready to bend the whole formation toward the first real sighting the instant it came. Where the machine marched, the Union fleet stalked. It was slower and it was uglier, and it kept every choice open until the last possible breath. Out on the far edge of it all, Ione's element swept the forward dark, her scouts strung across a front so wide that a single ship could run an entire watch without sighting a friend. They were the fleet's outstretched fingertips, the first thing that would touch the enemy and the first thing that would burn for it. She kept them moving, kept them quiet, and read every thin whisper they sent back for the one that would matter. Twice her scouts brought back sightings that set the whole fleet leaning, and twice the sightings dissolved into nothing under a harder look. A cold moon warmed by starlight, an old drifting hulk from some earlier fight. Each ghost cost hours and frayed the crews thinner, and each one carried the same silent question. Commit to a phantom and guess wrong, and the machine would find the fleet wrong-footed and empty-handed while the Verge burned. So Sereth held. He let the ghosts go by and kept his bays closed and his fleet coiled, waiting on the one thing that would let him strike, a sighting solid enough to bet a war on. Around him 1,000 crews held their breath in the dark. Somewhere ahead, closing every hour, 3 enemy tenders drove for Verrin on rails of perfect certainty, sure they had not yet been seen. It was one of Ione's scouts that found them, far out on the ragged edge of the screen. A thread of drive glow where nothing should have burned, holding a course too straight and too patient to be any drifting rock. The drone crept closer and closer to the dark shapes and held its cold eye on them until it was certain. And then it flung the picture home across the light hours and quietly died doing it. The picture reached Ione an hour old, and she knew it the moment it resolved. The spacing of it, the cold geometry, the flawless machine-perfect order that no human formation ever kept. This was the drive, the real one, 3 tenders bound for Verrin exactly where the enemy's own rigid logic said they had to be. She marked it, opened the channel to the flag, and gave the first true word of the battle. Contact, confirmed and real. The word ran through the fleet like current through a wire. Sereth had his sighting, and now the blind battle turned suddenly and terribly fast. He swung his whole force toward the contact and began emptying his bays, launching everything, strike drones and screens, and the long killers, hurling them across the light hours toward 3 ships that did not yet know they had been found. Far off, the machine's own screens caught the sudden bloom of Union drives, and the tender force began, at last, to turn. For the first time, the 2 fleets were reaching for each other in earnest, and still neither had laid eyes on a single enemy hull. It was all drives and drone swarms and old light now, thousands of machines racing toward a collision their masters could only guess the shape of. Somewhere in the closing dark, the leading strike swarms of each side were already crossing, on courses that would carry them into range within the hour. Ione held her scarred element together on the fleet's leading edge, her scouts spent, her strike drones armed, the enemy a smudge of certainty hardening into ships somewhere ahead. She had found the machine by knowing how it thought. Now the whole fleet was about to test whether knowing was enough. The first blind battle of the war was 1 hour from breaking open, and everything the hard months had taught them was about to be spent at once. Ione sat very still at the heart of her command as the range fell away, one hand resting near the worn, still unopened letter she carried, the other steady on the tactical plot. Once she had wanted only to bring her brother home. Now she held a fleet's forward edge in her hands and a battle bearing down that would settle the whole southern war. She did not look away from the plot. She had found the enemy. She meant to be there when it broke. Across the dark, two blind giants leaned into each other at last, their drone swarms already crossing in the black, their capital ships still hours from any sight of the foe. The Verge waited behind them. Verrin waited ahead, and in the narrowing space between two fleets that had yet to lay eyes on one another, the first great carrier battle of the war was about to begin. The next hour would draw first blood.